There is a question sitting at the center of world football right now that nobody has ever had to answer at a World Cup before. Not in 1966, not in 1994, not in 2022. A question that gets more urgent every single day as June 11th gets closer. What happens if Europe doesn't show up? 16 of the 48 teams at the 2026 FIFA World Cup are from UEFA, one-third of the entire field. France, Germany, Spain, England, Portugal, Italy, the Netherlands, nations that have collectively won 15 of the 22 World Cups ever played, the countries whose fans fill the neutral seats when their teams are playing, the football cultures that generate the atmosphere, the broadcasting numbers, the sponsorship value, and the global prestige that makes the World Cup the World Cup. And right now, in May 2026, with 35 days until the opening kickoff in Mexico City, there are 19 members of the European Parliament who have written to UEFA asking them to consider a boycott. There is a vice president of the German Football Association, a vice president of Bundesliga club St. Pauli, who has publicly said the time has come to seriously consider and discuss walking away. There is Norway's Football Federation president, a member of UEFA's executive committee, who says that an isolated boycott is not effective, but that European nations must speak with one voice. There is Iran's sports minister who has said his country has no intention of participating. And there is the former president of FIFA himself, the man who ran football for 17 years, who has publicly posted his support for questioning this World Cup. This is not fringe noise. This is the center of football talking, and it is the most significant political crisis in the history of the FIFA World Cup. Before we go any further, if this channel is giving you the coverage that actually explains what is happening instead of just telling you something is happening, subscribe right now. It takes literally 2 seconds, and unlike most things in football right now, it's completely free. Hit the button, let's keep going. To understand why Europe has reached this point, you have to go back to December 5th, 2025, the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., the official draw for the 2026 FIFA World Cup, one of the most anticipated moments in the build-up to the tournament. And before the draw even began, FIFA President Gianni Infantino walked to the podium and announced that he was awarding the very first FIFA Peace Prize to Donald Trump. The reaction across European football was immediate and significant, not because awarding a prize to a head of state is inherently inappropriate, but because of who was receiving it and what that relationship between FIFA and the United States government had come to represent. The World Cup was being hosted in America. FIFA had opened an office in Trump Tower in New York. A replica of the World Cup trophy had sat in the Oval Office since 2018, and now the president of the organization was creating a brand new prize and giving it on a global stage to the leader of the host nation. Norway's Football Federation president Lise Klaveness, one of the most respected voices in European football governance, did not stay quiet. She called for FIFA to scrap the Peace Prize entirely, saying that awarding such prizes should be left to established institutions. She said there need to be checks and balances, and that any investigation into whether the award breached FIFA's own ethical guidelines on political neutrality should be transparent in both its reasoning and conclusions. That was the moment the conversation shifted from whispers to public debate. In January 2026, Oke Gottlieb, vice president of the German Football Association and president of Bundesliga club St. Pauli, gave an interview to the Hamburger Morgenpost and said the time has definitely come to consider a boycott of the 2026 World Cup. He drew a direct comparison to the political boycotts of the Olympic Games in the 1980s, when nations used the withdrawal of their athletes as the clearest possible diplomatic signal. He asked the question that has been hanging over European football ever since. Qatar was too political for everyone, and now we are completely apolitical? He said the life of a professional football player is not worth more than the lives of countless people in various regions being directly or indirectly threatened by the World Cup host. Strong words from a senior figure inside German football. The DFB's executive committee met and released a statement that was notable as much as for what it revealed as for what it said. They declared that a boycott was not currently under consideration and that they believed in the unifying power of sport. But they also added in the same statement that political debates should be conducted internally and not publicly. That line was a direct public rebuke to their own vice president. A senior official raised a legitimate question. The federation answered it while simultaneously criticizing him for asking it out loud. Then February arrived, and the debate moved from national federations into the European Parliament itself. A group of 19 members of the European Parliament wrote an open letter directly to UEFA. The letter cited policies and rhetoric from the U.S. administration that raised serious concerns about respect for international law, democratic standards, and the principle of self-determination. It said a tournament reaching billions cannot be separated from its political context. It said each hosting decision sends a message about what the international football community is willing to accept or overlook, and it called for UEFA to publicly criticize FIFA and to allow a discussion about possible consequences, including a boycott, to take place. 19 elected members of the European Parliament directly addressing UEFA about the World Cup. That is not a fan group petition. That is a political institution formally engaging with a football federation about whether European teams should travel to America this summer. The Greenland dimension then added another layer that most football fans haven't fully absorbed. Tariffs of 10% were threatened against 8 European countries over the Greenland dispute: Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and Finland. 5 of those countries had already qualified for the World Cup. Denmark, Sweden, and Northern Ireland were still in the playoff rounds. The economic pressure reportedly dominated a UEFA meeting involving heads of national football associations. German Bundestag member Roderick Kieswetter of Chancellor Friedrich Merz's Christian Democratic Party suggested publicly that a boycott might not even require military action to become relevant, that the economic pressure alone could provide sufficient justification. Annalena Baerbock, former German chancellor candidate and president of the United Nations General Assembly, was asked directly about the tournament on German broadcaster RTL. She said, "If there is not a basic set of rules that everyone adheres to, then a football World Cup cannot function." When the president of the UN General Assembly is being asked about whether a football tournament can function and gives that answer, the political environment around this World Cup is unlike anything that has come before. Here's where things get genuinely unprecedented, because Iran's situation has moved from uncertainty to something that looks much more like a definitive answer. Iran qualified for the 2026 World Cup from Asia. They were drawn into Group G, with all their group stage matches scheduled at venues in the United States, Los Angeles and Seattle. And then the military situation escalated after what Iran's sports minister described as being forced to fight 2 wars in 8 or 9 months, with thousands of Iranian citizens killed. The minister stated publicly on German news agency DPA, "Because of the malicious measures taken against Iran, we were forced to fight 2 wars in 8 or 9 months, and thousands of our compatriots were killed." He said his country has no intention of participating. Iran's scheduled group matches are against New Zealand in Los Angeles on June 15th, Belgium in Los Angeles on June 21st, and Egypt in Seattle on June 26th. At least one of those opponents, Belgium, is a UEFA team. If Iran withdraws, Belgium's group stage changes. The draw changes. The structure of Group G changes entirely, and FIFA has to make decisions about walkover results, replacement schedules, and what to tell the fans who already bought tickets specifically to watch those matches. FIFA President Infantino's public position has been one of determination. At the FIFA Congress in May, he declared that Iran will play in the United States as scheduled. But Iran's sports minister has given a direct and clear answer in the opposite direction. FIFA says they're coming, Iran says they're not. 35 days from kickoff, that contradiction has not been resolved. Now let's look at the financial trap that makes any boycott decision so extraordinarily complicated, because money is at the heart of why the boycott debate has remained a debate rather than becoming an action. The penalties for withdrawing from the World Cup are severe and specific. Withdrawing more than 30 days before the tournament costs 250,000 Swiss francs. Withdrawing later, after the 30-day mark, costs 500,000 Swiss francs. Additional disciplinary measures could include exclusion from future FIFA competitions, potentially affecting participation in events like the 2027 Women's World Cup in Brazil. These penalties could potentially be avoided if multiple countries were to boycott together, their safety in numbers. But coordinating that kind of collective action across 16 UEFA federations, each with their own institutional relationships with FIFA, their own national football associations, their own squad of players who have spent years preparing for this moment, is a nearly impossible logistical and political task. And then there's the money. FIFA's projected revenues for the 2023 to 2026 cycle are approximately $13 billion, up 73% from the previous cycle. That money gets distributed back to national associations. European federations receive a significant share of that distribution. Walking away from the World Cup means forfeiting that financial relationship, not just for this tournament, but for the ones that follow. The German National Association receives funding from FIFA. So does France. So does Spain. So does every one of the 16 European nations who qualified. When Klaveness says that an isolated boycott by Norway is not an effective means of lasting change, part of what she's acknowledging is that Norway cannot afford to pay 250,000 Swiss francs and walk away from the FIFA financial ecosystem alone. The historical comparison matters here too, and it is not encouraging for anyone hoping that this time will be different. In 2022, the World Cup went to Qatar. The concerns were documented and extensive. The deaths of thousands of migrant workers during construction, the criminalization of homosexuality, severe restrictions on fan behavior and expression. The German team covered their mouths in their team photo to protest FIFA's ban on pro-LGBTQ armbands. Player advocacy groups spoke publicly. Pundits and fans debated for years whether European nations should participate. And on the first day of the tournament in Doha, every single qualified nation was there. All 32 of them. Not one boycott held. Not one federation crossed the line from debate to action. That is the precedent, and it is the reason why most serious analysts, however sympathetic they are to the concerns being raised, believe the same thing will happen in 2026, that Germany will be in Houston on June 19th for their opener against Curacao, that France will play their group matches, that England will travel, that the European Parliament letter and Gottlieb's interview and Klaveness's careful words will ultimately remain exactly that, words, while the football happens as scheduled, and the cameras roll, and the billions of dollars flow. But here's what makes 2026 genuinely different from Qatar. In 2022, the concerns were about the host country's internal human rights record. Serious, deeply important concerns, but they didn't directly implicate the diplomatic relationships between European governments and Qatar in the way this tournament does. In 2026, the concerns are live and ongoing. Tariffs between the United States and European nations are not historical. They are current economic policy actively affecting European governments right now. The Greenland situation is not historical. It is ongoing. The Iran conflict is not historical. Airstrikes were reported as recently as the weeks before the tournament. The visa ban requiring fans from 50 countries to deposit $15,000 before traveling to America is not historical. It came into effect on April 2nd, 2026. These are not things that happened before the decision was made to host there. These are things happening while the tournament is happening, and that is a different kind of pressure. Lise Klaveness's framing is the most honest and the most important. She is not saying the boycott is wrong. She is saying an isolated boycott doesn't work. She is saying Europe needs to speak with one voice, and right now Europe is not speaking with one voice. Germany's DFB says a boycott is not under consideration. Spain's government has signaled sympathy for boycott arguments without making a definitive statement. France's sports minister has said there is no desire for a boycott but cannot anticipate what could happen. Norway's federation president has laid out the case with more clarity than almost anyone, and then explained why acting on it alone is counterproductive. That collective action problem, the inability of 16 nations to agree on a unified position when the penalties for going it alone are significant and the precedent from Qatar is so discouraging, is FIFA's greatest protection. Not its arguments about the unifying power of sport, not the FIFA pass visa system, not Infantino's press conferences. The thing that protects this World Cup from a European withdrawal is the fundamental difficulty of getting 16 institutions to agree on anything politically sensitive at the same time. And yet, 35 days out, Iran's sports minister saying his country has no intention of participating, 19 MEPs formally addressing UEFA, the former FIFA president saying the question is legitimate, Germany's own vice president using the word boycott in a national newspaper, and a tournament that was supposed to be the most inclusive, most unifying, most celebrated World Cup in history having to answer questions about its legitimacy before a single ball is kicked. The 2026 FIFA World Cup will almost certainly go ahead with European nations present. The football will be extraordinary. The moments on the pitch will transcend everything happening off it, because they always do, and because the athletes who've sacrificed years for this moment deserve to play. But the story of this tournament has already been written in ways that no subsequent results can fully erase. A political crisis of this scale, involving European parliaments, national federations, a former FIFA president, Iran's government, and the question of what it means to host a global celebration of sport in a country whose relationship with the rest of the world is as contested as it has ever been, doesn't get resolved by the opening whistle. It travels through the tournament. It shapes the conversation. It becomes part of the legacy. What football does with that legacy, whether it confronts these questions or absorbs them, whether the institutions learn from this moment or wait for the next one, is the question that will still be worth asking long after the July 19th final at MetLife Stadium. So tell me where you stand. Do you think any European nation will actually boycott the 2026 World Cup, or will the same thing happen that happened in Qatar? The debate ends when the tournament begins. And should football's biggest nations take a political stand, even if it costs them? Drop your answer in the comments. This is one of the most important conversations in football right now. If you want every update on this story as it develops over the next 35 days, subscribe and come with us all the way to the final. We'll be here for every twist, every statement, every decision that shapes this tournament. This story is still developing, and as always, football never stays quiet for long. See you in the next one.